really my privilege to say, welcome to Elders Action Network, Chat and Act, Electrify Everything. This offering today is dedicated to helping you reduce and eliminate the use of fossil fuels in your daily lives. It's about direct personal action that you can take. Importantly, it's about a regenerative approach, an inclusive and effective strategy of collaboration to address climate issues. It is more than just fighting, combating, or mitigating climate change. It is about all of us together reducing our fossil fuel use over the next few years that it'll probably take. The subtitle of this could be, or is, Developing Action Confidence. You know, when you go to purchase an electric heat pump water heater to replace the old oil heater or the gas heated water heater, you will know enough now to have a good conversation with contractors about what can and cannot be done, what is available in the marketplace, and how to speak to building officials, which is a really valuable skill. I'm pleased to say, as Libby pointed out, that Terry and I have completely electrified our home in San Mateo, California. In May of this year, I took my handy dandy earthquake wrench and shut off the gas to our home permanently. With what you learn from your colleagues and all of us today and in the next few weeks, we hope to put you all on that same path. Our journey here in San Mateo, I have to say, has not been without a few hiccups, a few potholes along the way, and we will be able to share some things that you can do and some things to avoid. And there is really good news on this. We have a tremendous opportunity to take personal action, subject of today's presentation, to build action confidence. The context that we're going to find ourselves in today is I will do a brief overview of where we find ourselves. Oh, I'm really sorry. I forgot to thank the team on this. This is a team effort of all of us. Pam, Melissa, John, Shirley, Libby, and Jim, who you're going to meet, plus Carol, Catherine, and Alan. We've been working on this Chat and Act, as Libby said, for some time. But this is the context in which we find ourselves. This is a time of deep uncertainty about the future of the planet and how to resolve what got us into this mess. You know, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize it's really hard to completely know what the future brings. However, there's really good news about the electric grid, power availability, electric appliance availability, and your ability to take very strong personal action. You're going to have breakout sessions today. We call them chat sessions. You'll get some breakout questions that will be put in the chat. That'll be the first breakout session. And then Brian Stewart will go into more detail about personal possibilities for electrification. And then you'll have another chance to chat and report out about the questions and roadblocks you see to personally electrify. This is really a great time to be alive because so many things are happening all over the country. There are exciting opportunities to take personal action everywhere you go. So this map shows what's happening in California, in New York, Oregon, and Washington, where city councils are adapting and adopting new building codes banning fossil fuels, primarily propane and so-called natural gas. In Kansas, wind farms are being placed on farms, and the wind is being sent up to the upper Midwest. In Florida, Texas, California, Hawaii, and other states, solar, especially rooftop solar, is being protected. Moving towards stronger standards for existing buildings is happening here in my town of San Mateo, as well as Eugene, Oregon, which are considering city ordinances for retrofits of existing buildings. Nationwide, private companies are starting to go block by block to convert existing buildings to electrification. That's happening in Sacramento, Ithaca, New York, and Menlo Park, California. Some locations are even committing to clean energy 24/7, 365 by the year 2025. 3 states have said no to more gasoline-powered engines sold in their states after 2035. That's Washington, California, and New York, as well as 25 countries. The big star on the far right is what's happening in Washington, D.C. with the Inflation Reduction Act, creating for each of us what we like to call an IRA climate savings account. Jim Burke will now put in the chat a link to the calculator from Rewiring America, as well as a link to a White House that explains it in more detail. When I was preparing this slide, I started looking at where you are all from, and I realized things are happening all over the country at the same time. If you look at where the yellow stars are, that's where you all are located. But when I found a great correlation between those parts of the country where electrification is on everyone's mind, where the grid is evolving, where there's local action for folks such as you. Grid upgrades, appliance availability, and your desire for electrification are evolving together, as has happened in the past, and it's accelerating. One of the big questions I often hear, will there be enough electricity in the right places? Well, we may remember, some of us, in the early 1950s when there was much less electricity in the United States. In the 1950s, the power doubled as we started getting refrigerators and air conditioning. The electrical power doubled again in the 1960s. Since 1950, the electrical power that is used for our electrical needs has increased 12 times. Clean power in the form of solar has increased many, many, many times just since 2011. Clean power and electrification are evolving together. The grid will be able to handle it, and we'll have a chance in 3 weeks to talk about how you can help your local community do that. We need to stop a little bit and talk about the little fossil fuel plant you have in your own home. If you look up in the attic of this drawing or photograph, you can see a gas furnace, oil furnace. It might be in the basement. You can see that over on the far left, you can see a gas fireplace. Also, on the far right, you can see a stove, water heater, and a boiler down in the basement. You have these kinds of fossil fuel plants everywhere in your home. They create high amounts of CO2, which Brian will go into in more detail. Burning gas in household appliances produces global warming CO2 that winds up in the atmosphere, and indoor air pollution in the form of carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and even benzene. Some have even said if the air inside the house was subject to the EPA regulations on clean air, the air inside your house would violate the Clean Air Act. I also want to point to the 2020 study cited in this chart at UCLA. They found that children growing up in a home with a gas stove are 42% more likely to develop asthma. As Libby pointed out, I grew up on a chicken ranch, and we had a gas stove, gas furnace, even a portable gas heater, and we had a gas water heater. We had everything, and all of us in our lifetimes have had to deal with asthma and bronchitis. You hear also a lot in the news today about recent ads for so-called clean fossil fuels. We use methane, otherwise known as natural gas, in our homes. Methane not only creates CO2 when it burns, but the leaks occur at places all along its pressurized system, at the wellhead, in the transmission and distribution lines and compressors, in supply lines, and in the appliances themselves. This is because the main piping system for methane gas is pressurized up to 1,400 pounds per square inch. Unfortunately, methane gas leaks are quite normal and cannot be fixed. As I mentioned, gas stoves leak even when they're turned off. And since methane is 80 times more deadly as a global warming agent, these leaks are a problem. Getting rid of methane is the solution, not just because burning it creates CO2, but because methane is also deadly. The basic understanding and point is that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are created when fossil fuels are burned. If you look on the chart on the far right side, you can see that in 1950, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 311. Today, that's 421 in just about 70 years, and climbing rapidly. It's climbing exponentially, not on a gradual curve. The problem is, as we know, when burned in our modern society, fossil fuel in the form of coal, gas, or methane is burned, all kinds of bad things are released. Heat is trapped, force to burning, water is disappearing, and droughts are occurring, and famine are occurring. Bluntly, we are out of time. Quite simply, there's an existential threat to the continued life of the planet, its people, and its ecosystem. In the past few years, we've broken heat records, wildfire records, rainfall records, seen epic flooding and extreme weather that has cost billions of dollars. We are already experiencing the impacts of climate change, and these will worsen over time. There's much more we can do. The major finding of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is clear. Carbon emissions must start on a downward slope immediately. Every addition of a replacement gas water heater with gas, or a new gas water heater in a new house, is a step in the wrong direction. And I also want to say energy conservation is great and start, but not enough. Those of you in the room on the Zoom call have already done so much in your own homes to reduce your energy consumption through efficiency and conservation. Congratulations, that's a great first step. But what we need is to electrify everything. In many ways, the Earth is not unlike the patient who goes to the emergency room complaining of a serious malady presenting serious symptoms near death. The admitting ER doctor treats the symptoms immediately in order for the patient to survive. After stabilizing the patient and making them just well enough to survive, the doctor then can begin to work on the underlying conditions, whatever they are. Our work for survival is similar. Operating in the background of a dying planet, forests destroyed and not growing back, extreme floods in Kentucky, Death Valley, Texas, and Pakistan, throughout the world. We have some very serious underlying conditions as a planet and as a society. It is extremely important that we do the things to electrify for survival. There's some good news, sort of. The life cycles of your gas water heater is such that in the next 6 years, there's a pretty good chance that your water heater is going to fail. That's the time to electrify. And if you can afford to do it sooner, so much the better. Your furnace will also fail sometime in the future. Your stove and your gas dryer are all going to fail. With electrification as a golden opportunity for you to replace and eliminate carbon dioxide from the planet. Some really good news, there's high quality electric appliances available for just about every use. By the way, Shirley, how am I doing on time?
You're okay for a couple more, 3 minutes.
Okay, good, thank you. The upper left-hand corner is a heat pump water heater. It's a Rheem model. The lower right-hand corner is a different kind of heat pump. This is for space heating and cooling. In this particular example, I'm showing the components, what is called a split system, which I won't go into detail. On the left is an electric washer, electric dryer, and the upper right-hand corner is a induction stove. These are real-life examples from my home. The upper left-hand corner is that big beast of an 80-gallon Rheem heat pump water heater sitting in front of our hybrid car. To the right is the heat pump unit mounted on our wall outside, which supplies coolant or heating to a fan coil unit in the attic. Down on the lower left, you will find our induction stove. And on the right is our very fancy and famous solar clothes dryer. Oops. You have an opportunity to electrify your ride. Your next car hopefully will be electric. What I've shown in the photo here is a 1908 Baker Electric, of which there were several thousand produced in the early 1900s. They had a range of about 50 miles, and they had a top speed of a whopping 15 miles per hour. The good news is you don't have to use these older vehicles. In the next year, there will be 30 new electric vehicles on the marketplace. That's important because 27% of the greenhouse gases on our society come from cars. So there's a kind of a pickle some of us are in. Do you keep your current car, or do you rush out and buy an electric vehicle? The best strategy that Terry and I are adopting, you saw our hybrid. We'll keep that car running as long as we can. We'll walk, we'll drive less, we'll batch up our errands, we'll carpool, we'll bicycle, we'll do all kinds of things to reduce the use of that car. And then when the time comes, we will go electric. Our car only has 45,000 miles on it, so it may be a while, and we were only driving now about 6,000 miles a year. And the last item we won't spend a lot of time on is manufacturing EVs is slightly more detrimental to the environment, but after about a year and a half, the electric vehicles are much, much cleaner. In aviation, some exciting things are happening. In the top photo is a picture of an electric airplane with a range of about 850 miles. It will have a passenger and crew capacity of passenger capacity of 9 plus crew. And the good news is 75 of those are currently in production for traveling up and down the East Coast. In the middle is a hydrogen airplane. That's a mock-up. Down at the bottom shows a mock-up or an Airbus 380 with tanks in the middle. The aviation industry is important because it accounts for 2% of the emissions on the planet. Some promising things are being developed, as I show here, but the emission-free aviation is still a long way off.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Bob. Yeah, and just one thing I'd say about Electrify Now is we started this. My wife and I actually started when I retired from Nike, and I had more time to do things that I was more interested personally. And one of the things I've always been interested in, I was a sustainability officer at Nike, but I was interested in what individuals can do. And I was frustrated that there wasn't really good information for regular people like you and I, all of us, about what we can do. And there's a lot of conversation about recycling and plastics and not enough conversation about energy, which is really kind of at the heart of all the problems that we're facing. So we started Electrify Now just to try to give people better information about what's possible to do and how optimistic it is and how important it is that the way we think about our own energy is part of the solution. So we won't have time today to get into a lot of the good questions that came up. We're probably not going to get to that level of detail. What I'm going to be talking about mostly today is just like why you should be so confident about this electrification concept and some specific things around how we do it, but not into the weeds on that. We're going to have some sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks where we'll have time to get into more of the details. But what I find talking to people is that most people don't really have, and I would include myself in this, even when I was working at Nike in a corporate sustainability position, I didn't really have a great idea about where carbon emissions came from in a macro sense. And it's important to get this picture that the vast majority, over 80% of the carbon emissions in the world come from burning fossil fuels for three things: for the electricity we consume, for transportation, and for heating of our homes and buildings, but also for industry. Of course, agriculture is a part of it, and there are industrial processes like making cement and waste treatment plants, et cetera. But the vast majority is from the energy that we consume. And the picture is very similar on a household level. These are the emissions that we're responsible for as individuals. And again, the vast majority of it comes from the electricity we purchase. So think of it as your electric bill, the gasoline you put in your cars, your gas bill, oil bill, if you have that. And of course, there's emissions related with the products that we buy and the food we eat, but it's really hard to reduce those. I mean, you can shop conscientiously and buy fewer things and buy local things, particularly food that's raised regeneratively or organically, and that will chip away at those boxes on the right here. But it's hard to eliminate these. But this big box, the 60% of our emissions from energy, it's entirely possible to eliminate that, make that go to zero. We've done that in our house and helped many people. It sounds like a lot of you have taken steps along the way here already, which is fantastic. So the reason is this is a problem is because coal and natural gas is the primarily source for electricity, although, obviously more renewables are coming online all the time. And gasoline and diesel is what we use for transportation, and then natural gas for heating our homes in many cases. And a lot of people have this impression that natural gas is clean. We've been told that our whole lives for marketing messages from the industry, but I think it's important to understand that methane is about the same as coal in terms of its global warming impact. And it's a huge source of air pollution, which, we don't necessarily think of. We associate cars with air pollution, but not necessarily heating our homes. But air pollution is a major problem with methane. So we have to have the mentality of we have to stop burning these fossil fuels. Like burning fewer of them is not really sufficient. We have to completely eliminate them. And the good news is on this, although that sounds daunting, and it is, wind and solar are now the lowest cost ways to create new energy. In the United States, this is particularly true, and these are graphs for the costs of wind and solar compared to gas and coal and nuclear power here in the United States. But this basic picture is true all around the world. And prices on solar and wind are projected to go lower further. And some of the IRA investment and other investments from the Biden administration are specifically aimed at making that happen. Whereas gas and coal and nuclear there's no real obvious ways that those will become cheaper in the future, and they'll probably go up. So that's good. Battery prices are on the same trajectory. They're dropping rapidly. And then the other thing that's been happening over the last 20 years is that electric appliances have just become dramatically more efficient. The LED light bulb is kind of the poster child for this because it's literally 10 times more energy efficient than an incandescent bulb. But the same is true of our refrigerators, our computers, stereos. Anything that you plug into the wall takes much less energy now than it did even 10 years ago. And that's not true, by the way, of fossil fuel burning devices. They haven't significantly improved in efficiency over the last 30 years. A lot of that's because the oil and gas industry fights efficiency measures really effectively. So electric appliances have been getting dramatically more efficient, and electricity literally gets cleaner every year or every day. You can, think of it every time someone puts solar panels on their roof or the new wind turbine. We see those all the time here in the Northwest. On the highways, we see these parts of wind turbines being shipped along the freeways. It's pretty exciting. They're going out to wind farms. So every time one of those is put up, the grid gets cleaner. And so you can see this is the trajectory we've been on, partly because renewable energy is getting so much cheaper. So when you combine those ideas of cheap and abundant electric energy that's really renewable and high efficiency electric devices, you get to this idea of electrifying everything. And it's you'll hear those words more and more. It's basically conjuring up this future, a sustainable future where we get basically all of our primary energy needs from the wind and the sun for electricity, transportation, and heat. And the good news is it's possible to do this today, which we'll be talking about. The other good news about this is that it comes with these incredible side benefits because, we've been focused in this conversation about carbon reduction, but when we eliminate fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels, you get cleaner air because that's where air pollution comes from for the most part, apart from wildfires, which we experience here in the West quite frequently. But most pollution comes from burning fossil fuels. We'll get cleaner and much more abundant water. I've seen estimates that range from 10% to as high as 30% of the clean water that we have available to us is used for processing fossil fuels. So that was going to free up a huge amount of water that we don't need for those purposes. Better jobs, obviously, who wants to work in a coal mine when you can be putting up windmills or something like that, and a stronger economy. Many studies, most of them that have an economic component, all of them show the advantages to the economy from this transition to clean renewable energy. So huge side benefits from doing this besides just the carbon reduction benefits. But the stark reality, and this is where all of us come in, is that every single thing that's in the world today that burns fossil fuels has to be replaced with a clean energy alternative before 2050. And this can be pretty daunting when you think about all the things that are out there that burn fossil fuels. And the big things like coal and power plants, every one of them has to be replaced, and there's thousands of those. Think of all the cars and trucks. There's millions of those that need to be replaced. And then, of course, gas furnaces and water heaters, one of the things we've been talking about, there's millions of those as well. And all of those need to be replaced. But as Bob mentioned, each of these things has a lifespan. And before 2050, it's fair to say that everything, with the possible exception of a few brand new power plants that burns fossil fuels today, is going to exceed its useful life between now and 2050. So we have an opportunity every time one of these things is ready to be replaced to replace it with something clean. And we have these amazingly potent and powerful solutions that are here today. We don't need to wait for some kind of innovation or technology improvement. Wind and solar that we talked about is ready to replace gas-powered energy generation. And we just saw a study that came out in the last week from NREL about the potential to get the United States energy grid completely 100% clean by 2035 with existing technology primarily. So it's possible to do, but it's like Bob said, this mentality of doubling our supply of clean energy every 10 years, that's the mentality we need to have. It's a scaling mentality. The same is true with electric vehicles. These things exist. There are not enough of them yet, but the technology is here. And heat pumps, which we've been talking about, work for commercial buildings and also for our own homes. They are the solution that will take care of the vast majority of our heating problems. So the solutions are here, but unfortunately, they need to be scaled really quickly. And that's why all of us can be a helpful part of that. So I want to spend a little time just talking about why this concept of renewable energy plus electrification is so important, because the combination of those two things, like I said before, it eliminates carbon emissions. It doesn't just reduce them, it eliminates them. And so one of the easiest ways to understand this is in our own homes. So typically, and these are general numbers that are applicable across the United States, the electricity that we consume in our homes, generally speaking, is going to create about 3 to 5 tons of carbon emissions per year. It'll vary where you are, but roughly speaking, that's a good number. A typical automobile is about 4 to 8 tons. A gas furnace is about 4 to 8 tons, very similar to a car. And a gas water heater is going to be 1 to 3 tons. So these are the 4 biggest sources of carbon emissions in anyone's life who owns a home in particular. Obviously, if you rent an apartment in the city, these numbers will be smaller. But and if you have a big home with lots of people living in them, these numbers could be quite a bit bigger. But these are good estimates. And if you take what are known as efficiency strategies that are behavior oriented, like turn off lights when you're not using them, and drive more efficiently and slower, and get an efficient car and drive less often, and turn your thermostat down, or even take cold showers. With these efficiency strategies, you might reduce your energy usage by 20% or so, which is great, but that's hard. Nobody really likes taking cold showers, so it's hard to keep that up. But if you compare this to the combination of renewable energy plus electrification, you see why it's such a stark contrast in how powerful this combination is, because it's possible for all of us, and we'll talk about this, to get 100% renewable energy today. It's available to literally everyone in the United States through one method or another. And that means instead of 3 to 5, you're generating 0 with your electricity. And now when you use that clean electricity to charge your electric car, instead of 4 to 8 tons, it's 0 for your EV every year. And your heat pump to heat your home, 0, and heat pump to heat your water, also 0. So you can see how you've just made, instead of just reducing them slightly, you've eliminated these emissions from the 4 largest sources in your life. And what that means for a typical home is instead of generating 20 to 30 tons of carbon dioxide emissions every year, you are literally creating zero. And one of the awesome side benefits from this is that in general, your operating expenses are going to be significantly lower. Now, we have had a lot of conversation already about, the capital costs of making that switch are real, and the IRA will help those. But once you're on the other side of those switch to renewable energy and clean electric devices, your operating expenses will be dramatically less, typically $1,000 or more less. And with the high price of gasoline, it could be even higher. So in terms of your savings. So that's why this concept is so powerful. We have the opportunity to live in homes that are safer and more comfortable. And this is one thing that I like to really emphasize, is that we can spend our energy dollars on the solution rather than continuing to fund the problem. Because that $4,000, which is the typical spending that we have on energy every year, we're basically funding climate change with that energy spending. But if you make these transitions, now what you're doing is you're funding the solutions, which is really, I think, motivating and energizing. At Electrify Now, we try to keep it simple for people. And so if you go on our our website, you'll see it organized this way: how to get clean energy, how to get rid of all the fossil fuel burning devices in your home, how to clean up your transportation. And then we won't talk a lot about it today, but it's important that all of us realize too that we have to be thinking about how we bring everyone along on this journey with us, because many of us have the means to take these steps now, and many people are struggling just to pay their electric bills in the first place. So these capital expenses can be really difficult. So we have to have legislation and philanthropy to help everyone along on the journey with us. But just quickly, and we won't go into a lot of the details, but cleaning up your electric supply is one of the most important things. And I heard a lot of you have already taken this step, but if you haven't, I would urge you to look into it. It's one of the simplest things to do, is to just sign up for the Green Power Plan. Almost every major utility in the United States offers one of these. And it's a good way. You're going to spend a little bit more money per month on your electric bill, but you'll be getting green power, which is important. For a lot of people, rooftop solar is a great deal. If you're planning to be in your home for another 5 to 10 years, and if you don't have too many trees on your property, this is a great way to reduce your energy bills and add clean energy to the generation to the grid, which is important. And then in some states, here in Oregon, for example, community solar is available. It's pretty spotty around the country, but some of you may have this in your state, and it's a fantastic way to get renewable energy by subscribing to local solar farms. And typically you get a break on your electricity prices as well. But any of these methods, or a combination of all three, we do all three at our home because it works for us, but you can avoid 3 to 5 tons, and now you're helping to get clean energy generation, and you're powering your life with clean energy, which is why it's so important to do. So if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to look into that first. And then the second thing, which we'll be spending more time in the next webinars in the next couple of weeks, about how to ditch the gas in your home. And Bob already mentioned this, but the two big things are your water heater and your space heating. And again, there's a lot of details that go into, so we won't. But when you do these things, you'll get all the benefits that you want out of hot water, for et cetera, and even a more comfortable home, because you'll have better air movement in your home and more air filtration without gas, which is great. You'll get better indoor air quality, which we'll talk about. Cooking, most people think about their stoves, and that's important. We've already had some conversation about induction stoves and how advantageous they are, but even electric barbecues are worth considering. Get rid of that smoke and gas pollution from your barbecue. And then there's other smaller devices like fireplace inserts. Oftentimes that's one of the things that, cooking in your fireplace are one of the things that oftentimes people have an emotional attachment to, but you can get electric fireplace insert. We have one in our home, and operates just as well as the gas one. Looks almost exactly the same. You would not be able to tell the difference. And then, of course, gas-powered outdoor tools can be replaced as well. And when you do these things, you're going to be in a house that's better. It's more comfortable and safer, better air quality, and lower operating expenses. All these things are easier to maintain, and cumulatively will help you avoid another 5 to 11 tons of carbon emissions. So I want to spend a little time on the superior air quality. Bob mentioned this, but there's been a lot of studies about methane gas from cooking. You may have seen some of these, but the main problem is that the carbon monoxide and the nitrous oxide emissions from cooking with gas creates indoor air pollution that, as Bob mentioned, would be illegal if it was outside. Most vents on stoves are not that great. If they're blowing back into the house, they're not helping you at all. And even the ones that blow to the outside often don't have enough air movement to really take care of this indoor air pollution. So you can get dangerous air just in the time it takes to fry an egg. And induction stoves have none of those problems. They're much better in terms of performance. They don't create those pollutants that we just talked about, and they're easier to clean and maintain. They're just better. I think that I want to spend a little time on transportation because this is a really big one. You know, the latest estimates are that nearly 30% of our carbon emissions come from transportation, and most of it is from our cars. So that's because a car, like we mentioned, one car is going to produce almost, 8 tons per year. Some people say, well, yeah, but don't EVs just trade the problem of burning gas with getting electricity? And this is the miles per gallon you would have to be getting with a gas car in order to be cleaner than an electric car in various parts of the country. So you can see here in Wisconsin, I know there's a few of you here in Wisconsin that have a little bit dirtier grid. So it's not the same as out here where we have a really clean grid, but the average across the United States is 88 miles per gallon that a car would have to get in order to be as clean as an EV. So way better. And the other reason that they're exciting is because you just get so much more transportation for the money. Here's 2 cars there's a Hyundai Kona that's a gas car that gets about 90 miles for $10 worth of gas. But the electric version of that same car, it's identical, except for the drivetrain gets, over, 276 miles for the same amount of money. So that's why the trucking industry is really excited about it. And the other thing, just quickly, some of you have EVs, so you know this already, but EVs are way cheaper than most people think. The price tag, and this is again the 2 cars that are the same except for the drivetrain, you can see it's pretty daunting at this $10,000 in above when you first look at the sticker price, but with the incentives that come from federal and in some case state rebates, but then the cost of ownership over 5 years, this is where you really get the savings, because you'll save so much money on gas and so much money on maintenance that over 5 years, an EV is cheaper by far to own than a gas-powered car. And we talked about manufacturing the batteries, and I'm going through this quickly, but a gas car is going to produce about 100 tons over its lifetime. This is a mid-sized car. And an EV takes more emissions to build it in the first place, but over its lifetime, it's going to produce far fewer emissions. And if you're charging with renewable energy, you can see the comparison is really 15 tons versus 100 tons. You can see why EVs are so much better than gas cars over their lifetime. So just to wrap up, these are the 4 things that you should be remembering: your electricity, your car, your furnace, and your water heater. We have tons of information on our website about this, and a newsletter if you're interested in webinars on each of these topics. If you want to go deep on water heaters or central air conditioning or resilience, that idea of what happens when the power goes out. We've done webinars on all those that are available on our website. So thank you.